Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. Welcome to House of Horror. Tonight's story is inspired by real events from a quiet house in Iowa, where 8 people were murdered in their sleep, and where something still wakes up every night at exactly 12:45 a.m. Turn down the lights, put on your headphones, and listen carefully. Part 1. The house that never slept. The house looks ordinary in daylight. That is the first lie it tells. The white wooden structure stands quietly on East 2nd Street, its porch clean, its windows polite and symmetrical. Children ride bicycles past it in summer. Neighbors wave from across the road. If you didn't know the address, you would never stop. But the house has never slept. Not since 1912. At night, the Villisca Axe Murder House does not creak the way old houses do. It waits. The walls hold sound instead of releasing it. Footsteps don't echo properly. Voices feel swallowed before they reach the ceiling. Visitors often describe the sensation as walking into a held breath. Something is always counting. Martha Lynn bought the house in 1994. She did not buy it because it was haunted. She bought it because history doesn't disappear just because people are uncomfortable with it. The murders had never been solved. 8 people, 6 children, 2 adults, killed in their sleep by someone who never faced justice. The house had been repainted, renovated, softened. She stripped it back to 1912. That was the second mistake. Guests began arriving almost immediately. Paranormal investigators, skeptics, thrill seekers, couples looking for something to test their relationship, people who wanted to feel something. They paid to stay the night. $428. The price of curiosity. The experiences were consistent. Footsteps upstairs when no one was there. Children's laughter drifting down the staircase. A man standing silently in the doorway, holding something long and dark. Always the same hour. 12:45 a.m. The house becomes alert at 12:45. Lights flicker. Air thickens. Even people who don't believe in ghosts feel it, the sense that something has woken up. Investigators set up cameras and audio recorders. The house does not perform for them. It waits. In November of 2014, a group arrived from Wisconsin. They had done this before. Regular recreational paranormal visitors. Not amateurs. Not reckless. They knew the rules. No running, no provocation, no disrespect. One of them was Robert Stephen Larson Jr., 37 years old. Quiet. Observant. The kind of man who listened more than he spoke. Robert chose the upstairs bedroom, the children's room. Most people avoid it. Robert didn't. He said later, before he stopped speaking entirely, that the room felt less loud than the others. That should have been a warning. At 12:44 a.m., nothing happened. At 12:45, the house inhaled. Robert's friends were downstairs when they heard the sound. Not a scream. A sharp intake of breath. Then silence. They found him minutes later. Collapsed. Bleeding from the chest. The wound was deep, precise, and, according to police, self-inflicted. No one argued that part. What no one could explain was why. Robert survived. But when asked what happened upstairs at 12:45 a.m., he said nothing. Not once. Not to police. Not to doctors. Not to friends. He recovered physically. Something else never came back. The house remained open. That is the most important detail. No one closed it. No one sealed the doors. No one asked the house to stop. Because the Villisca Axe Murder House does not chase people. It doesn't lure them. It doesn't attack. It waits. And sometimes, very rarely, someone listens too closely. Part 2, 12:45 a.m. At exactly 12:45 a.m., the house changed. Not suddenly. Not violently. It simply became aware. Robert felt it before he heard anything. The children's bedroom, where he sat alone with his back against the wall, seemed to tighten around him. The air grew thick, like the room had leaned forward to listen to his breathing. His chest felt heavy, not from fear yet, but from pressure, like the house was testing how much space his lungs needed. Downstairs, one of his friends later said the temperature dropped sharply. Another said the lights dimmed for just a second. A third swore the staircase made a sound, not like footsteps, but like someone dragging something carefully upward. Robert did not hear the stairs. He heard breathing. It did not come from behind him or beneath the bed. It came from inside the walls, slow and measured, as if the house itself had lungs. Each inhale stretched the room slightly wider. Each exhale pulled it back. Robert stood up. That was when the children's room remembered what it was for. The beds were empty, but the air above them was not. The blankets, neatly arranged, untouched, shifted almost imperceptibly, as if weight had settled into them without disturbing the fabric. Robert's skin prickled. He felt watched from below eye level, the way an adult feels when surrounded by children standing too close. He whispered his friend's name. The sound did not travel far. It died halfway to the door. The house did not like sound at this hour. Robert stepped toward the doorway and stopped. The hallway beyond looked longer than it should have been, the shadows stretching unnaturally, pooling near the staircase. At the far end, something darker than darkness stood still, tall and narrow, blocking the view of the downstairs light. He could not see its face. He could see its hands. They were holding something long, wooden. Robert's heartbeat grew loud in his ears. Too loud. He pressed a hand to his chest, trying to calm himself, trying to remember that this was why he came. Recordings, stories, adrenaline. Nothing here was supposed to touch him. The floorboard beneath his feet creaked softly. Not a normal creak. It sounded deliberate, like acknowledgement. The breathing in the walls stopped. Silence filled the room so completely that Robert felt dizzy. His ears rang as if they were searching for sound and finding none. Then, from very close, so close it brushed the inside of his skull, a voice whispered. Not angry, not threatening, patient. Lie down. Robert shook his head violently. No, he whispered, though the word barely existed once it left his mouth. The voice sighed. Disappointed. The temperature dropped again, sharp enough to sting. Robert's breath fogged instantly. The beds creaked in unison, as if something had settled into them at the same time. He felt the pressure of eyes on him now. 8 of them, watching, waiting, remembering the shape of sleep. From downstairs, his friends heard a sound they would never agree on. One said it was a thud. Another said it was a cry cut short. Another said it sounded like metal striking would once, clean, precise. Robert felt something press against his chest. Not force. Guidance. A memory of how it had been done before. He screamed then, not in terror, but in resistance, and the pressure spiked sharply, painfully. The room tilted. His vision narrowed. The voice spoke again, closer, clearer. Everyone lies down eventually. Robert staggered backward, clutching his chest. The pain was sudden and blinding, a hot, tearing sensation that stole his breath. He collapsed against the wall, sliding down as the house exhaled around him, satisfied. Downstairs, the clock clicked over. 12:46 a.m. The house relaxed. When his friends burst into the room moments later, the air felt normal again. The beds were empty. The hallway was just a hallway. The shadow at the stairs was gone. Only Robert remained, bleeding, shaking, alive, and staring at the wall with an expression none of them could name. Later, much later, when doctors asked him why he had done it, Robert said nothing. When police asked if he had seen something, he said nothing. When friends begged him to explain what the house had shown him, he said nothing. Because some things don't ask to be understood. They ask to be obeyed. And the Villisca Axe Murder House was still open. Still charging for overnight stays. Still waking up every night at 12:45 a.m. Waiting for the next person willing to lie down. Part 3. What comes back with you? Robert recovered in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and quiet fear. The doctors called it a miracle. The blade had missed his heart by inches. The wound was clean, almost careful, as if whoever, or whatever, had guided his hand knew exactly how far to go. Robert listened. He did not respond. When they asked him why he had done it, he stared at the wall and breathed shallowly, like someone afraid of making noise in a place that listens. When they asked him if he remembered the house, his jaw tightened. His eyes shifted, not away from the question, but downward, as if something below the bed had moved. They stopped asking after that. Robert went home weeks later, quieter than before. He stopped sleeping in beds. He slept sitting upright in chairs, knees pulled in, hands locked together so tightly his knuckles stayed white through the night. When exhaustion finally dragged him under, he dreamed of hallways stretching longer than they should, of soft footsteps moving carefully so as not to wake children who were already awake. He never dreamed of the axe. The house didn't need to show him that again. His friends returned to their lives, carrying the night like a story they could never tell the same way twice. They avoided that address. They avoided the hour. They avoided the feeling that sometimes crept in at night when their homes grew too quiet and the floor seemed to remember weight. But the house did not lose interest. Visitors kept coming. They always do. People arrived with cameras and recorders, with bravado and curiosity, with the unspoken belief that nothing truly bad happens to people like them. They paid the fee, signed the waivers, laughed nervously as the door closed behind them. At 12:45 a.m., the laughter always stopped. Some nights, guests heard footsteps pacing the upstairs rooms slowly, deliberately, like someone deciding where to sleep. Other nights, they heard a man's breath behind them when no one stood close enough to feel it. Children's voices drifted through the halls, not crying, not screaming, counting softly, as if keeping track of time. The house did not repeat itself perfectly. It adjusted. It learned. Martha Lynn tried not to read too much into the reports. She told herself that fear fills in gaps where certainty should be. Still, there were nights she stood alone in the doorway after guests had gone, feeling the house settle around her, as if disappointed she had not stayed. Once, long after midnight, she heard a sound upstairs that stopped her cold. A mattress creaking under weight. She did not investigate. The house remained open. And something else began to happen, something fewer people talked about, because it sounded foolish. Guests left carrying the house with them. Not the ghosts. The habit. They reported difficulty sleeping afterward. They felt uneasy lying flat, as if the act itself invited attention. Some slept with lights on. Others avoided bedrooms entirely. A few claimed they heard breathing beneath the floors of their own homes, slow and patient, as if something had followed them back, not as a presence, but as an idea, a way of being. Robert understood this part better than anyone. Months after the incident, he stood in his kitchen late one night, barefoot on cold tile, and felt the familiar pressure return, not sharp, not painful, just a suggestion. A reminder of how easy it would be to lie down and let something else decide where his weight should go. He stepped back. The pressure faded. The house had not followed him, but its rules had. At the Villisca house, the hour never changed. At 12:45 a.m., clocks still hesitated. Cameras still malfunctioned. People still felt the urge to sit, to rest, to stop standing guard over their own bodies. The house did not want blood. It wanted compliance. It wanted bodies where bodies had always been. And sometimes, very rarely, it found someone who listened closely enough to hear what it had been asking for over a century. Lie down. Be still. Let the house remember you. Part 4. The children's room always goes first. There is a reason the house begins upstairs. It is not sentimental. It is practical. The children's room is where the house learned its most important lesson. Bodies are quietest when they are small, trusting, and already asleep. Visitors feel it the moment they step into that room. The ceiling seems lower there. The corners hold shadows even at noon. People speak more softly without realizing why, as if worried about waking someone who has only just closed their eyes. Beds remember weight. The house remembers order. 6 children lay there once, heads turned toward the wall the way they had been taught. The house remembers how easily breath leaves a room when no one resists. It remembers the sound a mattress makes when a body settles and does not rise again. At 12:45 a.m., the room becomes instructional. Guests who choose it often say the same thing later, that it felt calmer than the others. Less dramatic. Less loud. They mistake the absence of noise for safety. They mistake stillness for peace. Robert had made the same mistake. The house begins by asking for nothing more than quiet, a slowing of breath, a slight heaviness in the limbs. The suggestion that standing takes effort, and effort is unnecessary. The longer someone remains in that room, the more the idea settles in them, like a habit returning. Downstairs, the adult's room behaves differently. It holds tension, regret, the sense of waking too late. But upstairs, the house teaches rest. It is why investigators rarely capture anything violent. The house does not like spectacle. It prefers compliance. It prefers the moment when someone decides, without quite deciding, that lying down is reasonable. That night in 1912 did not begin with screams. It began with sleep. The house had already been prepared. Curtains drawn, doors locked, an axe placed carefully, blade turned away from light. The killer moved slowly, deliberately, as if aware that speed wakes people. The house remembers this pacing. It repeats it every night, not as a reenactment, but as a rhythm. At 12:45 a.m., something reaches the top of the stairs. Guests sometimes hear it, not footsteps, but a pause. A hesitation, like someone listening to count breaths behind closed doors. Then the air changes upstairs, thickening, leaning inward. The house does not show the axe anymore. It doesn't need to. What it offers now is worse. Choice. People who leave the children's room before midnight rarely feel anything. People who stay past 12:30 begin to feel the pressure build, subtle and convincing. Their bodies grow heavy. Their thoughts slow. The floor feels closer than it should. Some sit on the bed, just for a minute. The house likes that. Once weight is given, the room responds. Mattresses soften. The air warms slightly. The silence deepens. It becomes difficult to remember why standing mattered at all. Most people fight it. They pace. They turn on lights. They leave the room and laugh it off downstairs, shaken but intact. Those people are not remembered, but a few, just enough, stay. They don't scream. They don't panic. They simply stop resisting the idea that the house has been asking the same thing for over 100 years. Lie down. Be still. Let it finish. Robert did not lie down. That is why he lived. The house does not punish resistance immediately. It applies pressure until something gives: sleep, fear, resolve. When Robert refused, the house adjusted. It offered guidance instead, a suggestion that became a movement that became a wound. Enough to mark him, not enough to keep him. Since then, the house has learned something new. It does not need compliance inside its walls anymore. It only needs to teach the lesson once. Visitors leave carrying it in their bodies, the memory of how heavy rest can feel, how reasonable surrender sounds when exhaustion whispers louder than fear. They carry it home, into bedrooms with unfamiliar ceilings, onto beds that suddenly feel too soft. The Villisca Axe Murder House does not trap people. It trains them. And every night at 12:45 a.m., it practices. Part 5. What the House Teaches. Robert stopped marking time by clocks. After Villisca, hours meant nothing to him. What mattered was posture. Whether his body was upright or yielding. Whether his weight belonged to him or had begun to feel negotiable. He learned quickly that the lesson the house taught did not fade with distance. It followed routines. The first time he felt it outside Iowa, he was sitting on the edge of his bed at home, tying his shoes before work. The room was quiet, ordinary, safe. Then the pressure returned, not in his chest this time, but in his thighs. A gentle insistence, a suggestion that sitting was enough, that standing again was unnecessary. He stood up anyway. The pressure withdrew, disappointed but patient. Robert stopped sleeping in beds altogether. He slept in chairs, on couches with the cushions removed, on the floor with his back against the wall. Anything that kept his body alert enough to resist the slide into stillness. Friends worried. Doctors suggested medication. He refused anything that might make his body forget itself. Because forgetting was the point. The house did not want to be remembered as a place. It wanted to be remembered as a posture. People who stayed overnight in Villisca often described the same aftereffect: a lingering heaviness, a strange reluctance to lie flat. Some said their dreams changed. They dreamed of rooms that asked them to stay, of floors that felt warm and forgiving, of voices that never raised themselves above a whisper, because whispers are harder to argue with. A few stopped dreaming altogether. Martha Lynn noticed the pattern long before anyone named it. Guests who returned for a second visit behaved differently. They moved more slowly through the house. They sat longer in the children's room. They touched the beds with a familiarity that unsettled her. It was as if the house had already introduced itself to them somewhere deeper than memory. She began warning people more seriously. Not about ghosts, about staying aware of their bodies, about not lying down, about leaving rooms if they felt tired. Some listened. Some smiled politely and stayed anyway. At 12:45 a.m., the house always rewarded attention.
It was not dramatic.
No screams echoed down the street. No blood stained the floors. Instead, there was a subtle shift, a deepening of quiet, a thickening of air. The house leaned into its oldest habit, replaying the night it learned how easy sleep can be to interrupt and how hard it is to wake from once permission is given. The children's room remained the center of it all. Guests reported the same sensation there again and again. The feeling of being watched without hostility. The sense that nothing bad would happen if they simply stayed still. That resistance was exhausting and unnecessary. That was the lie. Robert understood it better than anyone. He knew now that the axe had never been the true weapon. It was only a tool. What the house wielded was patience. The axe ended lives quickly. The house ended them slowly. Years passed without another incident like Robert's. Some took that as proof the danger had been exaggerated. Others understood that rarity was part of the design. If the house took someone every night, it would be closed, studied,
Sealed.
Instead, it waited. It allowed people to leave. It let the lesson spread quietly. Robert eventually stopped being afraid of sleep itself. He learned how to rest without surrendering, how to sit without sinking, how to lie down without letting his body forget who it belonged to.
Not everyone learned that balance.
Somewhere, far from Iowa, a former guest woke up at 12:45 a.m. and felt the weight return. Somewhere else, someone decided not to get back up. Somewhere else, a bed remembered how to hold a body too well. The Villisca Axe Murder House remained open. Tourists still paid the fee. Investigators still brought cameras. The house still practiced. Because the house does not need to kill anymore. It only needs to remind people how easy it is to stop standing. Final part. The house is still open. The truth about the Villisca Axe Murder House is simple. It does not end stories. It begins them. People expect a haunted house to want something obvious. Fear, blood, attention. They expect violence because violence is easy to recognize. What the Villisca house wants is subtler than that and far more sustainable. It wants habit. It wants the moment when a body decides that resistance is tiring, that stillness feels earned, that lying down is reasonable. It wants the small surrender that feels harmless because it happens every night, in every home, all over the world. That is why the house never closes. Closing it would suggest the danger is contained within its walls. But the house has never needed to keep anyone. It only needs to teach them how to leave incorrectly. Robert understood this long before anyone else did. Years after his visit, when the scar on his chest had faded into a pale reminder, he stopped trying to explain what happened upstairs. Language failed him not because the experience was too complex, but because it was too familiar. Everyone already understood the impulse. Everyone had felt it, the urge to lie down when standing felt pointless, the comfort of letting go when nothing seemed urgent enough to stay alert for. The house simply amplified that instinct and stripped it of consequence. Robert eventually returned to Villisca once. Not as a guest. He stood across the street at night, hands in his pockets, watching the windows. The house looked the same.
Calm.
Polite. Innocent. He felt the familiar pressure in his chest when the clock inside ticked toward 12:45, even from that distance. He did not step closer.
He did not need to.
He knew now that the house was not unique. It was just honest about what it was. Other houses learned faster. Newer buildings learned quietly. Places where people slept without thinking, where exhaustion was normalized, where stillness was treated as safety. The Villisca house was old enough to show its work. That is why people see children there. Why they hear footsteps. Why they glimpse a man holding an axe in the hallway. Those are teaching tools, visuals to keep attention focused while the real lesson settles deeper. Do not fight. Do not resist. Do not stand when lying down feels easier. Most visitors leave thinking they survived something. They didn't. They graduated. The house remains open today. Tourists still arrive with cameras and questions. They still sign waivers and laugh nervously. They still say the same thing when they step inside. It doesn't feel that bad. And they're right. It doesn't. Not until 12:45 a.m., when the house remembers what time it is, and someone upstairs feels their body grow heavy in a way that feels earned instead of dangerous. Most people stand up. Some people don't. The Villisca Axe Murder House does not care which kind you are. It will be there either way. Quiet. Waiting. Teaching. The house is still open. The hour still comes. And somewhere tonight, someone decides not to get back up. This is House of Horror. Good night.